Okay, get ready to unlock your thinking because we're diving into some really cool research you've got on boosting brain power. And you know me, I love a good aha moment. This time we're flipping the script. Turns out getting our brains humming might start with our bodies.
It's true. We often get stuck thinking about thinking as this purely mental activity, but our brains don't exist in isolation. There's a fascinating two-way communication happening between our brains and bodies all the time.
Okay, let's unpack this. You mean it's not just our brain telling our body, hey, go for a run. Sometimes the body's sending signals back that change how we think.
Exactly. We've all felt that mental shift after a good workout. But even small, low-intensity actions can have a surprising impact on our cognitive abilities.
Okay, so not talking marathons here, but more like
No.
what? I love a good example.
Well, remember how you mentioned you like to rub walnuts when you're concentrating? Turns out you might be on to something. A study by a researcher named Annette Shermer at the University of Birmingham found that these kinds of small, repetitive movements, fidgeting, can actually help people focus, especially during tasks that require sustained attention.
Wait, for real. People tease me about the walnut thing, and now it's science. Okay, tell me more. How does that even work?
It seems counterintuitive, right? You'd think it would be distracting. But think about it. Our brains crave stimulation. If we're bored or our arousal levels dip too low, our minds tend to wander. These small movements help us stay in that sweet spot of alertness without becoming overly distracting.
So it's like giving your brain just enough to do, keeping it from getting bored and checking out.
Exactly. And it's not just fidgeting. Even simply standing up while you work can make a difference.
Okay, I've heard about standing desks, but I'll be honest, I always thought it was a bit of a fad. How much difference can it really make just to be on your feet?
You might be surprised. Remember, our bodies evolved to move. When we sit for long periods, our circulation slows down, and that includes blood flow to the brain. A 2018 study in the Journal of Physical Activity and Health found that even just standing for a few minutes each hour can improve blood flow to the brain's prefrontal cortex, which is the area responsible for things like decision-making and working memory.
So it's like giving your brain a mini energy boost just by changing your posture. I like it. But I imagine there's more to it than just blood flow, right?
You're right. There's a fascinating mind-body connection at play. Remember those low-intensity actions. When we stand, we naturally tend to shift our weight, make small adjustments, maybe even pace a little. These movements send signals back to the brain, helping to increase alertness and focus.
And I bet it doesn't hurt that standing burns more calories than sitting. Maybe less guilt about that second cup of coffee. Okay, so we've covered fidgeting, we've covered standing. What other tricks does our body have up its sleeve to help us think better?
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about hand gestures.
Oh, you mean like how I talk with my hands a mile a minute? I've always thought of it as a bad habit.
I'd say it's more of a superpower. We often think of gestures as just a way to emphasize our words, but they actually play a key role in how we think and learn.
Really? Tell me more about this superpower.
Think about how children learn. Researchers like Susan Golden Meadow at the University of Chicago have observed that kids often use gestures to express ideas they don't yet have the language for. And get this, those gestures can actually predict their future language development.
Wow, so it's like our hands are helping us shape our thoughts even before we have the words. That's amazing.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
And this connection between gestures and thinking doesn't disappear as we get older. Studies have shown that even adults learn and problem solve more effectively when they're encouraged to use hand gestures.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. So it's not just about being more animated. It's like those gestures are actually doing some cognitive heavy lifting.
Exactly. It's like our bodies are helping us to physically grasp and manipulate ideas. It's almost as if we're thinking with our hands as well as our brains. And here's another layer to consider: the environment we're thinking in. You mentioned earlier how differently you feel walking in nature versus being in the city. That's not just in your head.
Okay, good. Because I was starting to feel a little like Goldilocks here too, fidgety, not standing enough. Now my office needs a makeover.
Well, I wouldn't say a makeover, but there are definitely things we can do to optimize our surroundings for better thinking. Remember those stress hormones that get reduced when you're in nature? Turns out, even brief exposure to nature can boost our cognitive function.
So I should start taking more walking meetings.
It couldn't hurt. But even small changes to your workspace can make a difference. Studies by the environmental psychologist Roger Ulrich have shown that just having a view of nature from your window can reduce stress, improve focus, and even speed up recovery times after surgery.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm never closing my blinds again. What about those of us stuck in a windowless office? Are we doomed?
Not at all. Even adding a few plants to your workspace can have a similar effect. A study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that being around plants can actually increase creativity and problem-solving skills. It's like bringing a little bit of nature's magic indoors.
Okay, I'm sold. Plants, natural light, check and check. Anything else we can do to hack our environment for better thinking?
This one might surprise you. Personalize your space. Think about how you feel in your own home versus a generic hotel room, even if the hotel is objectively nicer.
Oh, for sure. There's no place like home. But what does that have to do with thinking?
It's about feeling a sense of ownership and control over our surroundings. When we feel comfortable and in control of our space, it can actually reduce stress and improve our cognitive performance. One study even found that people who personalize their workspaces are perceived as more competent and confident by their colleagues.
Okay, that's a good enough reason for me to put up some vacation photos. But what about the great open office debate? I've heard arguments on both sides. Some people thrive in that collaborative environment. Others find it totally distracting. What's the verdict?
It's a tricky one because there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Both open and closed office layouts have their pros and cons, and it really depends on the individual and the type of work they're doing.
Okay, so let's break it down. What are the benefits of an open office? And who might thrive in that environment? So open offices are great for collaboration and staying connected, but maybe not ideal for tasks that require deep focus. What about the flip side? What are the benefits of a more closed-off workspace?
Well, for starters, privacy. When you're working on a complex task that demands your full attention, having your own dedicated space free from distractions can be crucial. In fact, a study published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology found that employees in private offices reported feeling less stressed and more focused compared to their counterparts in open-plan layouts.
That makes sense. Sometimes you just need to shut out the world and get in the zone. But isn't there a risk of being too isolated in a closed-off environment? Don't we also need interaction to spark creativity and innovation?
You're absolutely right. We're social creatures by nature, and our brains often work best when we're collaborating and bouncing ideas off each other. It's a delicate balance.
So how do we find that balance? Are we destined to be either distracted in a noisy open office or isolated in a silent cubicle? There's got to be a happy medium.
Many companies are realizing that the key lies in offering a variety of workspaces. Think designated quiet zones for focused work, collaborative areas for group projects, and even comfy lounge spaces for informal meetings or just taking a break to recharge.
So it's not really about open versus closed,
Right.
but rather about having the right environment for the task at hand.
Precisely. It's about creating a workspace that supports both individual needs and the demands of collaborative work. And speaking of collaboration, this actually ties into the final piece of the puzzle we wanted to explore, the social element of thinking. You were saying earlier how much you love a good chat, and it turns out there's a scientific reason for that.
Okay, I'm all about those scientific explanations for my quirks. Lay it on me.
Well, our brains are wired for social connection. Think about it. From the moment we're born, we're constantly observing, interpreting, and responding to social cues. It's how we learn to navigate the world, build relationships, and ultimately thrive as a species.
So you're saying our social brains are kind of a big deal.
Huge. And here's the fascinating part. Our social brains don't just switch off when we're tackling non-social tasks. In fact, there's evidence that thinking about things in a social context can actually make us better problem solvers.
Wait, really? Give me an example. How does my love for a good gossip session translate into, say, solving a math problem?
Remember the Watson selection task we talked about earlier? That logic puzzle where you had to figure out which cards to flip over to test a rule? Well, it turns out people are much better at solving that puzzle when it's framed in a social context. Like imagining the cards represent people at a bar and the rule is about who's allowed to drink alcohol.
Because we're hardwired to spot a rule breaker.
Exactly. Our social brains are constantly scanning for cheaters and freeloaders, making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Fascinating. So you're saying we can actually leverage our social brains to boost our thinking in other areas. How do we do that? Should I start inviting people to brainstorming sessions disguised as cocktail parties?
That's not a bad idea. But on a more practical level, it's about being mindful of how we frame problems and seek out solutions. Could this challenge be tackled more effectively as a team? Could framing this information as a story make it more memorable and engaging? These are just a few ways we can tap into the power of our social brains.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We started with fidgeting, and now we're practically throwing social gatherings to boost brain power. Who knew?
It's amazing what we can discover when we start to connect the dots, isn't it? Our brains are incredibly complex and interconnected with our bodies, our environment, and our social interactions. By understanding these connections, we can unlock new levels of creativity, focus, and cognitive potential.
So it's not just about thinking harder, it's about thinking smarter by harnessing the power of our bodies, our surroundings, and our social connections. It's like a whole new way of approaching the world.
Absolutely. And the best part is, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore and discover about the amazing capabilities of the human mind.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. If we can boost our brain power by simply changing our posture, adding a plant to our desk, or having a chat with a colleague, what other untapped potential might be waiting to be unlocked? Until next time, keep those minds curious and those conversations flowing.